In a miserable future version of France, the country has fallen under strict government control after years of climate disasters, social instability, and constant public anger. Cities are filled with surveillance systems, military-style police patrol the streets, and drones constantly monitor civilians from above. During this period, several climate activist groups begin targeting a powerful corporation believed to be responsible for environmental damage and political corruption. One night, members of the resistance secretly gather in an abandoned industrial district while heavily armed police units prepare nearby for confrontation. The atmosphere is tense because everyone knows the authorities now respond violently to any form of protest. The activists move carefully through dark alleys and exchange quick instructions. The group eventually carries out their mission by planting explosives at the site, and moments later, a large explosion tears through the area. Riot police immediately storm the streets as tear gas spreads everywhere, forcing protesters to flee through narrow stairways and crowded passages. Julia, one of the activists, desperately tries to escape the crackdown along with the others as the entire operation quickly falls apart. During the chaos, Eloy is badly injured while attempting to get away from the police. Julia struggles to keep him awake and repeatedly rushes around searching for help, but the situation worsens when he is suddenly shot. She collapses and loses consciousness while the protests completely collapse around them. When Julia regains consciousness, she realizes she is no longer in the city. Instead, she finds herself alone in a landscape that feels empty and unfamiliar. The environment is harsh and silent, with almost nothing around except an isolated house that appears abandoned. Confused and disoriented, she slowly approaches the building, hoping to understand where she is. Inside the house, she discovers a room marked with her name. As she enters another section of the room, a recorded message suddenly begins to play. The voice explains that the place is called Planet B, a virtual prison created to hold the criminal members of the resistance group until the government finishes its investigation. The recording also reveals that everyone connected to the operation will remain trapped there until their trial and until the identities of the remaining members are exposed. Not long after, Eloy suddenly appears and finds Julia inside the building. When she asks about his leg, he tells her that he barely remembers anything from before waking up there. He also explains that they are not alone in this strange place. Eloy then leads Julia to the others who have also appeared inside the virtual prison. The group is filled with confusion as everyone tries to understand where they are and what is happening to them. Among them is a man known as Mehdi, a hacker, who introduces himself to Julia while the others continue arguing and questioning the situation. Soon the group begins exploring the area together, searching for any possible exit. Eventually they arrive at a location where they suddenly become unable to move any farther forward, as if an invisible barrier is blocking them. Victoire becomes furious and begins demanding answers from Julia about the events during the protest. Julia explains that a CRS officer may have been involved during the explosion and that there is a possibility he died during the attack. Hearing this, Victoire starts panicking over the fear that they could all receive life sentences. Julia tries calming her down by insisting that what happened was accidental. Meanwhile, in the real world, a woman named Noor arrives at a secure facility where she works. After scanning her eyes to gain access, she overhears workers discussing highly sensitive equipment somewhere inside the building. Later, she secretly smuggles one of the equipment out, hidden among trash being removed from the facility. Back on Planet B, the prisoners continue searching desperately for a way to escape the simulation. At one point, one of them decides to head toward the ocean to see whether there might be a path beyond it. The moment he crosses a certain point, the environment suddenly shifts into nighttime. Everyone freezes in place for several seconds as if the system itself has stopped working. After regaining movement, they hear a disturbing sound echoing from the sky, causing panic to spread through the group. Moments later, Gudin is suddenly dragged beneath the water by something unseen soon after his body rises, floating at the surface. Julia immediately rushes into the ocean to save him, but within seconds she notices a strange man approaching her from the darkness. Terrified, she attempts to run away but crashes into a transparent wall that feels like solid glass, trapping her away from the others with no way back. She suddenly begins screaming as his eyes turn completely white, leaving her shocked and afraid. Julia later wakes up near the ocean and makes her way back to the house, where the others are acting unstable and confused, unable to understand how long they have been trapped there. After some time, Julia goes to Eloy's room to check on him. While she searches, he suddenly appears from under the bed in a panic, clearly shaken by a nightmare where he saw blood everywhere. He then begs her to give him names of the people involved so they can be released, but she refuses. At the same time, Noor enters a military base in secret to retrieve the device she had previously stolen from a garbage area. She later returns to the disposal site and searches through the waste until she manages to find it again. After recovering it, she brings it to a woman named Hermes. When they inspect the device, Hermes notices a military symbol and immediately becomes alarmed, believing it could be dangerous. Despite Noor trying to convince her to accept it by suggesting a price, Hermes refuses to handle it and orders her to leave with it. Outside, the city is in chaos, with people running from police clashes and smoke filling the streets as violence spreads. Julia, unsure of what to do next, moves through the chaos until she hears a church bell and runs inside for safety. Inside the church, Noor sets her belongings down and prays for guidance, but the device she carried accidentally falls out of her bag. Noor puts the device on, and immediately she is transported into the same virtual prison system. Confused and disoriented, she reacts in panic, not understanding where she is, until she hears shouting and quickly hides. Julia eventually finds her and assumes she is another prisoner, asking her questions about what is happening outside, but Noor cannot understand what she is saying. Julia then brings her back toward the others, where she notices that Noor does not have the B marking on her forehead like the rest of them. This makes Julia suspicious, and she begins questioning her identity while calling for Gudon and Victoire. In that moment, Noor quickly removes the device, realizing with shock that she has made a serious mistake. Back in the virtual prison, everything suddenly turns dark again as Julia becomes the target of a disembodied voice that keeps demanding she reveal names. The pressure feels constant and inescapable, as if the system itself is trying to break her. In the real world, the woman begins searching online for information about Julia and the others. She soon discovers that they are missing activists from Grenoble and that their families are actively looking for them, which confirms they are not ordinary prisoners, but people who have disappeared. Meanwhile, Noor sits by a church window smoking when she notices police cars and armed forces rushing into the building she was in earlier. The officers quickly investigate the area and realize that whoever used the device is no longer inside, suggesting the user has already been transported elsewhere. Inside the virtual prison, Julia is pushed into a series of disturbing psychological illusions. She experiences vivid and graphic scenes involving the officer she believes she accidentally killed, along with his daughter confronting her and questioning what she has done. At the same time, the voice continues to pressure her for names, while other prisoners around her also suffer similar mental attacks, screaming and crying in distress. Eventually, the torment suddenly stops and the environment resets to daytime. Two new prisoners appear near the beach and slowly walk inside, where they begin arguing with Victoire after claiming they met her 2 months earlier, even though she has no memory of them. Eloy is now visibly unstable, having carved the word innocent into his own chest, while Julia tries to calm him down and keep him grounded. Noor later returns to Hermes and asks for help on how to secretly use the device. Hermes initially refuses and does not want to get involved, but she changes her stance after Noor threatens to expose her illegal QR code dealings, which is how they originally met. Reluctantly, Hermes gives her a small additional tool that can attach to the headset and make the user invisible inside the system. Once Hermes leaves, Noor immediately attaches the device and enters the virtual prison again. She finds Julia lying on the ground while still being affected by the psychological attacks. When Julia wakes up, she explains that Noor stole the device from a military base where she works as a cleaner and that she needed money because her QR code authorization is about to expire. She also warns Noor that she is taking a serious risk because the military believes the device signal is just interference from foreign sources like China or Russia. Julia then asks Noor where the prisoners' physical bodies are being kept, but Noor admits she does not know, which confuses Julia even more. Before they can continue, one of the prisoners suddenly bursts into the area, causing Noor to vanish again from the system. The newcomer questions Julia about who she was talking to, but Julia dismisses it and says the person appears and disappears and is supposedly Chinese. After this, the virtual prison begins to shift into an even more unstable state. Some prisoners stare at the sun while crying and talking about false hope. Others try to dig at the glass-like barrier in search of escape, while many simply scream or break down emotionally. Back in the real world, Noor begins asking a colleague about something called the Blue Zone while they are being transported to their work location. The colleague explains that it is a highly advanced medical facility with restricted access that she is not allowed to enter. When they arrive at the base, case, the colleague is taken away separately while Noor is processed for her shift. After finishing her work and being escorted out, she tries to request a better position by asking to replace someone named Kim, but the supervisor refuses her request without hesitation. Back in the virtual prison, a loud siren suddenly activates, followed by an announcement stating that an intruder is present among the prisoners and that anyone who identifies them will receive a reward. The group quickly becomes divided, with some debating whether the message is real or just another system manipulation. While the others argue, Julia rushes to her room and pleads for Noor to appear. Noor soon shows up, and the two of them move to a quieter area where they can speak without being interrupted. Once alone, Noor introduces herself properly, and Julia immediately instructs her to connect to a forum in the North District. She tells her to act as if she is Julia, then contact a woman named Nebit and pass on everything she knows about Planet B, also sharing Julia's identification details so the message can be trusted. In the real world, Hermes arrives suddenly at Noor's home, accusing her of betrayal and warning that Interpol is already involved. After some tension, she still allows Hermes to stay inside with her. While going through missing persons documents together, Hermes makes a discovery that one of the prisoners is actually a hacker she recognizes. Meanwhile, as the psychological pressure inside the virtual prison continues, Noor returns to speak with Julia again. During this exchange, she reveals her past, explaining that 10 years earlier in Baghdad, she was part of an online newspaper with friends, and that the situation eventually forced her to fake her own death and take on a new identity as Amra Derwash, a hairdresser from Mosul. Before disconnecting, she promises Julia that she will try to get her out. Later, Hermes and Noor work together to locate the possible real-world base behind the system. Hermes recalls reading about a planned water tower being built in that area, but satellite images show no such construction, leading them to believe the site is still an active, hidden detention or control facility. This strengthens their suspicion that they have identified the correct location. Noor enters the virtual prison again to warn Julia, but Goudain notices her presence and stares directly at her. She quickly disconnects to avoid detection, but her appearance causes panic among the prisoners. They capture her and tie her up, demanding to know her identity so they can understand what is happening and possibly escape. During the chaos, Goudain spots the intruder again and begins chasing them through the environment. At the same time, Julia experiences another disturbing event when a vision of her father appears inside the system. He speaks to her as the prisoners around her descend into more violent and chaotic behavior. He tells her he is dying and urges her to say goodbye. Eloy also appears and becomes emotional, shouting and trying to interfere, while Julia tells him to shut the system down. Noor then intervenes and removes the device connected to Julia's father, cutting the interaction short. She notices that her invisibility tool is no longer attached and immediately rushes to disconnect and escape. Back in the virtual prison, a commander-like figure appears and begins attacking prisoners, shooting at them as he moves through the area toward Julia. He demands to know who was speaking with her father, and as he pressures her for answers, her heart rate rises rapidly until she collapses from the stress. In the real world, Noor returns to her home only to find it completely ransacked. As she calls out for Hermes, a man appears and claims he was sent to deliver a device lens, explaining that intruders had already broken in and caused the damage. Exhausted and uncertain, Noor ends up trusting him and hands over her laptop, which contains important evidence. Julia holds on to hope that Noor is heading to Canada and will eventually release information about the military base to the public. With that belief, she stays close to Goudain, and they comfort each other since they are now among the last remaining prisoners inside the virtual system. At the same time, Noor is visibly anxious in the real world, nervously turning a single watch between her fingers as she prepares for what she plans to do. She eventually arrives at the military base and goes through the standard security checks before entering the facility. Despite the strict screening, she manages to pass through without being stopped and begins her assigned work inside. Later, she creates a fire using a match, which quickly spreads and causes chaos inside the base. The situation escalates and she is soon arrested as a result of the incident. Back inside the virtual prison, Julia is walking with Goudain when he suddenly points out something in the distance. She looks in that direction and sees Noor, but this time she appears as another prisoner within the system. At the same moment, an alarm sounds in the military facility in the real world as Hermes arrives with armed forces to intervene and help the trapped individuals. The operation leads to their release, and the prisoners are finally freed from the system. Outside, Julia and Noor embrace each other after everything they have endured.